The microeconomic failure of the auto industry. First, a quick idea. Rather than giving $25 billion to the auto companies, why not rather give $25 billion to auto consumers to buy down the price of American-made cars? Could a 10% price cut in the price of cars help generate more spending? $25 billion in a consumer incentive might generate $250 billion worth of consumer spending. After all, it is consumer spending which leads to a healthy economy. In this video, I will concentrate on the economic salvation of America by bailing out the auto industry. We must bail out the auto industry, but only in a way that fundamentally changes what is broken. Briefly here, I will say that there are two major contributing factors. Corporate capitalism has proven to be a fundamentally flawed or failed economic structure. Unregulated free trade capitalism has proven to be a failed economic system that leads to joblessness, homelessness, foodlessness, and death. The problem with corporate capitalism is that power is centralized in the hands of the CEO and a few corporate executives. As a result, there is nothing to stop dishonest and greedy CEOs from acting to promote their own short-term selfish economic gain, even when it harms the long-term interest of consumers, workers, investors, and the nation. America has three branches of government and a balance of power for a reason. Similarly, corporate capitalism needs to be restructured to have a similar balance of power in order to protect consumers, workers, investors, and the nation from abuse of economic power. In the case of the auto industry, consider what could have gone wrong. If the CEO of an auto company also owns stock in oil companies, then it is in his selfish economic interest to produce gas-guzzling cars, even if it harms consumers, workers, investors, and the nation. And if the CEO is elected by super-rich stockholders who also own oil company stock, then there is a similar economic incentive to elect an oil-friendly CEO. It has been reported that General Electric produced an electric car but scrapped it due to bribes from the oil companies. That certainly was not in the long-term interest of consumers, workers, investors, and the nation. What restructuring would have prevented that? If America adopted the advice I gave in 1984 and established a National Economic Board to plan for the future and look at new technology, then steps would have been taken to make sure that barriers do not exist to prevent the production of new technology. If an existing company does not want to produce an electric car, then national funding can be provided so that another company will produce the new technology car. Companies must act in the long-term interest of consumers, workers, investors, and the nation as a whole. A National Economic Board would provide the economic incentives to see that that happens. When a company is started by the inventor of a product, the company is devoted to innovation and new technology, so the company succeeds. When the company forgets its roots, then it stagnates and fails. It is engineers who invent the products that allow the company to grow and succeed. Therefore, the best innovative engineers and computer programmers should have a much higher salary and a larger voice in the decisions of the company. In the case of auto companies, perhaps the CEO should be someone with an advanced degree in mechanical engineering or other industry-related engineering degree. Perhaps the best engineers in the company should sit on the board of directors. Perhaps consumer advocates and advocates for the latest technologies should sit on the board of directors. The key is to have a balance of power so that the long-term interests of consumers, workers, investors, and the nation are fully represented. How many times has the CEO and executives cooked the books to make things look good to stockholders so they can dump their stocks at a huge profit before the company tanks? The crime of insider trading and insider stock price manipulation is seldom made public or even investigated. Executives stabbing shareholders in the back happens because executives have an economic incentive to do so. That is because there is no balance of power. To correct that, the golden parachute should be eliminated. If investor money is at risk, then the CEO's salary should also be at risk. Stocks owned by executives must be placed in a trust fund and not sold until at least 5 years after they no longer work for the company. Most of the salary of executives should also be held for 5 years and only paid on condition of a thriving company 5 years later. Then CEOs and executives would have an economic incentive for the long-term success of the company rather than an economic incentive to cook the books and stab investors in the back. There's a need for a major restructuring for a balance of power to protect consumers, workers, investors, and the nation.